Lord Hendricks wants to know, how many milliohms is too high in a cell? Lord Hendricks, you're asking about the internal resistance of the battery, and the problem is that the internal resistance of the battery depends on the size of the cell. So, for example, for an 1100 to 1300 milliamp hour cell, similar to what you would see on a 5-inch freestyle quad, a resistance of, let's say, less than 10 milliohms is pretty good. A resistance of between, say, 10 and 20 milliohms is meh, okay. And a resistance of over 20 milliohms is, I don't like that. That seems high. There's a lot of variables there. Those numbers are just rough guidelines. But my point is that those numbers would be completely different if we were talking about a 450 milliamp hour whoop battery, or if we were talking about a 5,000 milliamp hour Cinelifter battery, right? If we're looking at a 5 or a 6 or 8,000 milliamp hour cell, we would see resistances down around like 2 milliohms, right? And maybe 6 milliohms would be, whoa, that's high. 6 milliohms resistance for a 1,000 milliamp hour cell is like, oh, that's really good. The smaller the cell, the higher the internal resistance, and vice versa. And so what you have to do is you have to build kind of a mental checklist of cell sizes and resistance based on the batteries that you use. And what I like to do is, if you really care about this, what you would do is you would build a spreadsheet. Ooh, it all comes down to spreadsheets, doesn't it, folks? That is what life. What was your life about? What is the secret, the meaning of life? You know, what's the meaning of life? And I'm going to be like, oh shit, wrong window. I'm going to be like, here it is. This is the meaning of life. Spreadsheets. So I would do like, battery name. Let's see. Brand. Milliamp hours. C rating. Internal resistance. I don't know. Maybe there would be more columns. I'm not sure. And I'd be like, okay, CNHL. Stop it. CNHL, 1000 milliamp hour, 100C. And then you measure the internal resistance. Okay? And you put it in. 8.2. 8.2 milliohms. I don't know. I guess it would have to be average IR. Because, of course, you're going to have multiple cells. Okay? And then you start building this spreadsheet, right? And then you'll start to have a sense, based on the milliamp hours, what's the internal resistance? What should it be? Now, I want you guys to notice that at no point did I talk about cell count. Because cell count is, the internal resistance is per cell. So if you have a 6S 1000 milliamp hour, the internal resistance of each of those cells is going to be the same as a 4S 1000 milliamp hour, because they're probably the same cells. It's just in one case there's 4 of them, in one case there's 6 of them. Okay? All right. One more thing, and I always have to put this disclaimer whenever we talk about internal resistance. Ooh, Super Deluxe points out the spreadsheet should have battery weight on it. That's a good point. A lighter battery is potentially going to be like more desirable if it has the same internal resistance. When you measure internal resistance, the battery must be fully charged. Internal resistance will be higher when the battery is not fully charged. If you don't measure internal resistance at the exact same voltage, 4.20 volts per cell, then the measurements are meaningless. If you have high volt batteries, you should still measure them at 4.20 volts per cell. Okay? The other thing is that temperature matters. If you have batteries and they've been sitting in your hot car and they're all warmed up, the internal resistance will read lower. If you have batteries and they've been sitting in the cold, the internal resistance will be higher. So you have to temperature stabilize your batteries. Now, the way that I do this, I am fortunate enough to have air conditioning, right? So my house is usually about the same temperature, within a couple degrees. So if that works for you, then just bring your batteries in the house, let them sit for a couple hours, and then measure the internal resistance. But don't bring them in from a hot car and immediately measure the IR, because those numbers will not be valid.